Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Escaping Eugene. Chapter 1. The person staring back at her was a stranger. She saw her emerald green eyes shining through a pale heart-shaped face with full lips. She saw her long and luscious lashes, brushing against her cheek as she blinked. She saw her satin, bold red gown with its deep V-neck showing off the ridges of her collarbones. Why, the dress alone was worthy of attention by itself. But it wasn't her. Verdie Cameron sighed deeply, her lips parting as dismay filled her features. She stared at herself, but the image was so far from who she was that it gave her pause. It seemed as if her body were rejecting her appearance, recoiling at the image in front of her. It felt wrong. Verdie knew it was irrational, but there it was. She wanted to tear off the dress and slip back into her favorite white gown, but the hand on her shoulder reminded her that she did not have the luxury. "You look perfect, darling." Her mother fairly hummed with satisfaction. "Breathtaking." Her mother, an older version of herself with her topaz gown, stood over her, staring at the reflection carefully. Not a word escaped her lips, but it wasn't in her mother's nature to stay silent for long. "All the men in the party will have a terrible time taking their eyes off of you," Mrs. Cameron purred as she moved away. Dread gathered in Verdie's heart as she thought of what was to come. Her mother's voice became a distant murmur as Verdie lost herself in her thoughts. "And dear, do remember," her mother's parting comments pierced through her, bringing her back to the moment. "Eugene Miller will be here. I strongly suggest you leave a spot for him on your dance card." Verdie's hand moved to the emerald chain around her neck, gripping it firmly as if to tear it away. She forced her hands to her lap as she thought about what was to come. How could it be that members of the same family could be so vastly different? Verdie had always felt as if she resided with strangers, creatures who did not understand her and made no attempt to do so. She would have done anything to avoid going to the ball, but she knew, at that moment, that coaches were driving up to their mansion, filled with men and women in their finest to enjoy a night filled with sweet talk and entertainment. Verdie detested it. She detested the whole notion of socializing with people who pretended to laugh as they glared daggers of envy and judgment. If it had been up to her, she would have thrown them out, but it wasn't up to her. She was forever stuck, and the thought depressed her. She knew she had to make her way downstairs, but she couldn't move, or rather, her body did not want to leave the sanctuary of her room, where she was now alone and content. The door opened, startling her. She turned, afraid that it would be her mother again. But to her relief, it was Emma, her maid. Emma was dressed in her uniform, a black frock with a white apron, her ebony hair in a bun resting on the nape of her neck. Her calm brown eyes regarded Verdie. "Miss Cameron, you must make your way downstairs. Your mother is asking for you." Verdie must have let her emotions show as Emma came near her. "I do apologize, miss. I know how much you hate these gatherings." "It's not just that, Emma," Verdie said. "I hate the dancing, the talking, and the sitting," Emma finished for her. Verdie nodded, and Emma smiled. "I'm afraid, miss, that this is how your life has always been and will probably always be." Verdie sighed. "I'm being a child, aren't I?" "No," Emma said firmly. "Just a young woman with her own dreams." "Yes, dreams," Verdie said, rising to go stand by the window. As she had thought, she could see the coaches arriving, the bejeweled ladies and debonair gentlemen lingering outside the front steps, exchanging their greetings before disappearing inside. "Sometimes, I wonder what it would be like to vanish," Verdie said, thinking that Emma would be shocked. But to her surprise, Emma only said, "It's not an impossible idea, but not one that I would recommend." Emma bowed her head slightly and left the room. Verdie lingered a moment before following Emma, her palms gripping the seams of her gown. She walked through the hallway leading to the stairs and descended carefully. She smiled politely as the socialites, entering through the grand foyer, bowed their heads to her. She walked past them, stepping into the ballroom, her smile carefully in place. Though she was sure that the guests were charmed by the decor, she saw it as stifling. The twinkling chandelier, the golden curtains, and the decorative mantle did not make her heart skip a beat. She noted that everyone had formed their own little groups, chatting amongst themselves. She saw her mother with Mr. and Mrs. Miller, no doubt talking about her. Verdie's mother and father both fervently wished for her to wed Eugene Miller, albeit for different reasons. Her father was focused on the advantages the match would bring, for Mr. George Miller was the owner of several mills and came from money. Though her father did not work, having inherited his wealth, this was an advantage to boast about. It sickened her. Her mother, of course, was only interested in the social climb such a match might provide. Thankfully, Verdie did not see Eugene Miller anywhere about, and she hoped she would not see him either, although the possibility was slim. He was persistent, and she might have been flattered if it weren't for the fact that she found his arrogance utterly detestable. Even as she pondered the man, she saw guests approaching her. She braced herself for the interaction even though such social intercourse was an art she had perfected. The minutes passed, and Verdie busied herself in the small talk and the insincere compliments. Eugene had yet to show himself, so she allowed herself to relax. The time for music was at hand. On her mother's instructions, Verdie had kept a spot open on her dance card, but she let the other spaces be taken over by well-suited but terribly dull young men. She would get through it, though. She had done it all many times before. The music started and her first partner came to claim her. Verdie kept her smile fixed on her face, going through the movements with little interest. Her body knew which way to go, and she let it take over, her mind far away. She was with her fourth partner when she glimpsed someone coming near. To her dismay, it was Eugene. In that moment, she realized just how much she had dreaded encountering him. "May I take the lady's hand?" Eugene interrupted, all politeness. "I am afraid our dance is yet to be finished," David Harrison, her partner, said. "I am sure she much prefers my company," Eugene retorted, a cocky smile on his face. Before David Harrison could utter another word, her mother appeared with a sweet smile. She chased away David Harrison, leaving Verdie with Eugene. It disturbed Verdie to see the glow of triumph that hid behind his perfect face. His blonde hair had been swept back, and his dark eyes took her in, flawlessly set in his strong face. She grimaced as his hands tightened on her, making her skin crawl. Oh, if she only could throw off his hands and retreat. But she was trapped in this show even as her mother beamed at her. "How have you been, my dearest?" he asked. "Fine, thank you." She forced the words out. "You do not seem well," he said slowly. "Has my presence flustered you?" She stared at him in disbelief, wishing that she could say something to deflate his ego, but instead, she pressed her lips together and remained silent. Eugene smiled in victory and to her relief, the dance ended. She was about to make her escape, when he caught her hand, leading her away. "Eugene, please let me go," she said, struggling to free her hand. "Come, Verdie, let's have a walk around your gardens." "It's cold outside," she said. "I'll ask your maid for a cloak." Before she could say anything else, he had already found a servant and asked her to fetch Verdie's cloak. Verdie could say nothing as he helped drape the cloak around her shoulders and took her hand. She shivered as she hugged her cloak tightly around her with her free hand. Eugene sauntered ahead of her, pulling her along, and she wondered if she could disappear. But then, he stopped. She thought that he would talk about the beauty of the gardens or perhaps the moon, or anything really that would have made her warm up to him, but instead, he said, "I am sure you were perplexed as to why I arrived late." "Unfortunately, I was detained on business." "Is that so?" It was the wrong thing to say, for he took it as an invitation to talk about the advantages of being as intelligent and prosperous as he was. She couldn't bear to stay and hear him boast about himself for another minute. "It has been long enough. Mother will be worried about me," she said, turning to leave. "I'm sure she won't be worried at all," Eugene said. "After all, you're with me." "Regardless," she said. "I must go." Tut tut. You must drop the pretense of being so shy. You and I are already arranged to be married. Verdie paled under the moonlight. I've heard nothing of that. Please, you mustn't be coy, Eugene said with a smile. I'm sure both our parents are already discussing when the wedding is to be. You overstep your boundaries, Verdie said coldly. I have heard nothing of this news, and I doubt I will. I will take my leave now. Her heart pounding, she turned, but she was pulled back by Eugene, who pressed her against his chest and said, My. You are rather upset today. Verdie pushed him away and rushed inside, shivering with disgust. Without any regard for her parents, she ran up the stairs to her room and closed the door behind her. She was beyond mortified at what Eugene had said. His advances today had been bolder than before, and the thought of marrying him made her cringe in fear. She could never allow it to happen. But, her mind whispered, what if he speaks the truth? No, she breathed. Never. She stripped off her clothes, put on her nightgown, and slipped under the covers of her bed. After tossing and turning, she drifted to a restless sleep. Chapter 2. What have you to say for yourself? Her mother demanded as she sat down for breakfast. Nothing, Verdie replied, knowing full well what her mother was going to say. You embarrassed both your father and me by leaving so abruptly. Eugene told us that you rudely disappeared upstairs, despite his company. I did not desire his company last night, Verdie said. And I do not desire it ever. Don't be such a child, her mother said. Eugene is a perfect gentleman, and when you are to be married. Married? Verdie cried with dread. So, it was true. Yes, of course. And soon. We've already decided it is to be 2 months from now, her mother replied smugly, sipping her tea. It will be the event of the year here in Philadelphia. Verdie looked at her father, her eyes pleading. I beg you, don't force me to do this, she said. Not Eugene, please. Verdie, hold your tongue, her father snapped. You will do as we say. We know what's best. Verdie gazed down at the cup of tea in front of her, her eyes filling with tears. After a long moment of silence, she dared to stand, leaving the dining hall for her own room. It was one thing to be born into the endless rituals of the rich, but to have no choice in her future was something she couldn't bear. Verdie had always dreamt of freedom, and marrying Eugene would be akin to trapping herself in jail. She had to do something. Anything. It didn't help that Verdie's parents had another outing already planned. To Verdie's horror, it was to be held at Eugene's parents' estate. Though her parents tried their hardest to convince her to attend with them, she was adamant. She could not attend, she wasn't feeling well. She sat in her bedroom, mulling over the mess she found herself in. Her door opened and Emma entered, a worried expression on her face. Verdie could only smile faintly. Miss? Emma began. I suppose the news has reached the servants, Verdie said. Emma nodded. Yes, miss. I can't believe they are doing this to you. I didn't want to believe it either, but I have no choice now. I must marry him. Ah, miss. You will never be happy. Emma bit her lip. I'm sorry. I speak out of turn. You're more than my maid, Emma. You're my friend, and you know me better than anyone else. But what can I do? Verdie asked despairingly. You must think of something. Emma said. There is nothing. Don't lose hope, Emma said fiercely. You'll find a way. I don't see how. You could leave, Emma said after a pause. You must leave this place. And where will I go? Anywhere, Emma said. I'm sorry again, miss. I dare say too much. But, as much as Verdie wanted to protest, she knew that leaving was the only way open to her. She had no idea how she was going to do it, but she knew that if she remained there, she was going to lose her mind. Father has money. If I borrow some, Verdie said slowly, I can go to the next town. Hide there for a while. Shall you go right now, miss? Emma asked. She looked suddenly disturbed. "Oh, I've said too much. I take it back. I have no choice." Verdie frowned. "Perhaps if I talk to my parents again, they might agree to not make me marry him." "Haven't you tried already?" Emma asked. The door opened. And another maid entered the room. "What is it?" Verdie asked. "Miss, Mr. Miller asks for your company." Verdie paled and exchanged a glance with Emma before getting up, taking her shawl, and draping it around her shoulders. She knew that she couldn't avoid it any longer. She had to confront him. She walked downstairs to the drawing room, where he was waiting for her. Eugene was dressed impeccably, which for some odd reason, made her dislike him even more. He had a smirk on his face as he looked her over, wrapped up in her dark red shawl. "Mr. Miller," Verdie said with a calm she didn't know she possessed. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I was disturbed that you didn't come to our gathering, so I came to see you," he said. "To see how your health fared." Verdie kept her face calm as she realized that her parents had used her health as an excuse. "I'm perfectly fine now. Nothing that a day of rest will not cure." "I suppose it must have been the shock at learning about our marriage," he said with a condescending smile. "Yes, I suppose so. I have to go back to my rest," she said. "You had better make your way back to your party." "But what if I wish to spend more time with you?" "My health does not allow it," she said firmly. He walked forward and grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward him. Though she kept her face neutral, she felt a rush of fear. "Let me go," she said, and was thankful when he let her pull her hand away. "You may see yourself out. You can be coy as you want, my dear, but soon." He left the rest trailing, and she knew exactly what he meant. He left her, closing the heavy entry door behind him. She headed back up the stairs but faltered when she reached the hallway to her room. Emma was there waiting for her and rushed to her side to assist her. "Miss," she cried, "what happened?" "You're right, Emma," Verdie said shakily. "I must leave or I will be forced to do something I cannot do." "But how?" "Father's money. I will borrow some. And I shall take some of my clothing, but not the most expensive ones. Anything will do. I must hurry before my parents come back." Emma bit her lip. "I'll make sure everyone is distracted so you can leave." She put her hand on Verdie's arm. "Go to the train station. There you'll be able to catch a train to the nearest city. Please contact me somehow, miss. Let me know you're all right." Verdie nodded, and Emma let go of her to run downstairs. Verdie went to her parents' room. She pushed open the door and stared at the interior. It was done in velvet, and the red covering seemed to mock her in the shadows. She walked past everything to the safe in the corner. She knew the combination, of course, having overheard her mother. A twinge of guilt went through her for taking advantage of that. But she had no choice, she was doing this for basic survival. She took some money, not much because she couldn't bear to think of herself as a thief. She would return the money after she managed to earn some. She closed the safe and rushed out, back to her own room where she began to shove her clothes into a bag. She didn't pack much, only what she needed. She shut the clasp of the bag and went downstairs. Emma had kept her word. There was no one about and Verdie freely exited the house, walking down the path, pausing only to turn back and take one last look at her home. She was leaving forever and the sight of her house made her heart squeeze painfully, but a part of her had always hated the manor and all it represented. She turned away once more and continued to walk with determined steps. "I must never look back," she said to herself. "I must survive on my own." Chapter 3. The knock on her door roused her from her reverie, and she opened it by a crack. It was the innkeeper, a lady with mousy brown hair and a hard, reddened face. "I haven't gotten the rent," she said in her drawling voice. "Of course," Verdie murmured and passed some of her father's money through the gap in the door. The innkeeper threw her a curious glance but said nothing more as she left. Verdie closed the door and leaned against it, her chest tight. When she had arrived in this godforsaken city 2 days before, she'd thought that perhaps she would be able to do something, secure a position as a maid or a housekeeper, or perhaps in a factory, but nothing had worked for her. It was her demeanor, her way of talking that made the employers wary. She hadn't been aware of it before, but now she knew the truth. She was simply too educated and too refined to be taken on without suspicion. Yet another reason for her to curse her upbringing. She walked around for 2 days, trying to find a way, but she had been turned aside at every corner. Even the innkeeper herself, a woman who paid no attention to anything, knew that Verdie was not all she claimed to be. Verdie looked with dismay at the bit of money she had left. She would barely be able to survive 2 more days with the money she had. What was she to do now? She couldn't go back, not ever. Even if she was to be reduced to a beggar, she refused to go back and marry Eugene Miller. She hadn't heard anything about her family or Eugene searching for her, but she had no doubt that they would do so soon. They would try to find her and then would force her to come back. Never. She hurriedly dressed and left the room, avoiding the looks of everyone she passed. The inn wasn't at all what she had expected. It was run down and quite sorry looking, ready to tumble to the ground at the slightest wind. With relief, she left it behind and traversed the streets, without a thought as to where she was headed. It was morning and she was hungry, but she had to wait because she wasn't sure she had enough money to eat 3 meals. The reality of her plight was hard, and she feared it was only her first taste of the life she could expect from then on. By midday, she had had no luck. She had walked for miles it seemed, and all she had experienced was more rejection. Dejected, she walked to a bakery and bought a small piece of bread, sitting on a street bench and chewing it slowly. As she was thus occupied, 2 women sat near her. She tried not to listen to what they were saying, but their voices were loud and animated. "All the men in the advertisements seem wonderful," one woman was saying. "Yes. Do you know who you are going to correspond with?" "I haven't decided." "Lucky we got hold of the Matrimonial Times," the woman said. "And their office is right over yonder on Elm Street. But still, I can't imagine going off and marrying someone out of the blue." Despite herself, Verdie was interested. Whatever were they talking about? As she listened further, she discovered what it was. Mail-order brides. Verdie had never heard of such a concept. The idea filled her with both fear and hope. Yes, it could work. If she couldn't find work, then she would marry someone. A part of her told herself that this was akin to what she was fleeing from, but at least the new man she married couldn't be as bad as Eugene Miller. And escaping Eugene Miller was all she cared about at that moment. With that in mind, she got up. She easily found Elm Street, and with no trouble at all, she spotted the establishment with the big sign, Matrimonial Times, on the front of it. It looked clean and pristine, certainly better than her living conditions. Without thinking too deeply, she walked in. The lady sitting behind the table took her in with interest. "How can I help you?" "I am here to be a mail-order bride," Verdie said. "Do you know what that means, child?" the lady asked, her eyes narrowing. Verdie found herself unable to speak over her own nerves. "It means that you will be consenting to become the bride of someone you have never met. We have several adverts of men from the West who would like to marry someone in the near future. You can take a look at the catalog and then decide who you want to correspond with." "Correspond with? How long will that take?" Verdie asked. "Well, it can take from 6 to 10 weeks, she said. "Given the time that it takes for the letters to go back and forth." "But I don't have that much time," Verdie said, only too aware of her paltry amount of money. The lady looked at her once more and said, "You are a pretty girl, and we do have something else you can do. Sometimes there are men who want to get married at once. You can choose from among them. But I must warn you, there is sometimes a flaw with these men." Verdie swallowed. Was she really so desperate? She realized that she was. "May I look at those adverts?" "You may," said the lady. "Fill in your details here and wait for a moment." Verdie took the paper the woman offered her and wrote down her first name and a false surname. She forged her family details, too, writing that her parents were factory workers. As she handed the page back, the lady glanced at it and nodded. "I may have someone for you," she said. "He is a widower in Plum River, Wyoming. He just lost his wife and wants a new wife for his baby." Verdie stopped. A widower with a baby? Could she do it? Could she take care of a child? She drew in a long breath and nodded. "Yes. That will do nicely. Come back tomorrow," the lady said. "I'll have everything prepared for you by then." Verdie raised her chin, feeling hope for the first time in days. She turned around and went back to the inn, hoping that nothing would go wrong now. The next day, Verdie was back at the matrimony establishment. The same lady was there, and she handed Verdie an envelope. "This has everything you need to know. We've given you a train ticket as well as some money for expenses. The name of the man is Karl Homer. Like I told you yesterday, he lives in Plum River, Wyoming. We have sent him a telegraph, and he'll be there to pick you up. It'll be a long journey, so prepare yourself." Verdie nodded as the woman spoke to her and took the envelope with shaking hands. Her heart slammed against her chest. The rest of the conversation blurred in her mind, and it was only when she stepped outside that she realized she needed to know when she was to leave for Plum River. She had no idea how long her journey would take, what kind of man Karl Homer was, or how to take care of a child. But she was sure she could do it. How hard could handling a household be? Verdie felt a multitude of emotions as she walked into the train station the next day. It was crowded, and she had to push her way through the throngs of people. She felt scared but excited, incredulous but wary, not to mention surprised that she could function with such conflicting emotions. She found her seat, sat down, and sighed softly. She had made inquiries beforehand and had learned that this trip was going to take her more than 2 weeks. That, too, was uncertain as there could be such alarming things as Indian attacks or other delays along the way. Regardless, she was going to have a lot of time to reflect on her decision. As she stared out the window, the train's whistle blasted through the cool air. Verdie let out a big breath and wondered how her family was. Had they tried to look for her? She had been in the city nearly a week but had no evidence of them. Perhaps they had let her go. Even that thought caused a mixture of sadness and relief, sadness as the thought of them not searching for her made her feel unwanted, and relief that she was indeed free. She looked down at her pair of gloves, feeling cold despite them. She tried to calm herself. There was no point in being nervous now. She had to be strong. After all, in a few weeks she would be married and the mother of a child. This was no time for her to be a child herself. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. Chapter 4. The train was slowing down. Verdie yawned, hiding her mouth behind her hand. She had spent a good deal of her voyage dozing. Now, she looked out the window in expectation. She had wanted her first sight of Plum River to be perfect, but all she felt was trepidation. Now, as she gazed through the window, she decided that it didn't look terrible, just very different with its dirt roads and dusty buildings. Her first view told her that life was going to be harder there than she had been used to back home. The stops on the way west had become increasingly different looking. The land was distinctive, and she'd had no idea that the country was so vast and that acreage could stretch as far as the eye could see. The folks along the way seemed good-natured enough, but they didn't have the eloquence of speech that she was used to back home. Not that she had any problems with a lack of eloquent speech, but she worried that she would find it hard to adjust and that she wouldn't easily fit in. Verdie hoped her new husband wouldn't judge her by her manner of speaking. She hoped that she would lose some of her refined air. She'd try not to let her educated background become too obvious. But she was scared. What would Karl Homer be like? What about his child? There were so many unknowns about this entire decision, and she had no idea how she would manage to maneuver her way through them. The lady at the marriage establishment had told her that her fiancé would be waiting for her. But what if he wasn't? She didn't have his address with her, so how would she get to him? The more her thoughts swirled through her head, the more anxious she became. After the train screeched to a halt, she climbed down onto the platform and looked about, wondering what Karl would look like. She couldn't identify anyone and was about to go outside and try her luck when someone approached her. Before she could take him in properly, she heard his deep voice. Verdie Gilmore? Verdie startled, frozen. She was a little taken back at the last name, but then she recalled that she had used an anonymous name so that there would be no chance of anyone from home ever finding her. She found herself nodding, and then as she took in the man, her heart began to quicken. He had a lean face with dark brown hair, haunted gray eyes that seemed to pierce her soul, and a tall frame. She suddenly found it hard to speak. "Why yes," she said. "I'm Verdie." "I'm Karl Homer," he said quietly. "Follow me." Perplexed, she did so. Was that it? No more greeting of any sort? Nothing to welcome her? Why, that was awfully cold. She could sense from his haunted eyes that he was grieving. In truth, he didn't look all that pleased to meet her. But still, she couldn't stop the way her heart was beating against her chest, threatening to break through. What was this strange reaction to him? Looking at his back, she felt heat spread to her cheeks. They were outside now, and he led her to a coach standing ready for them. He didn't take her bag from her, so she handed it to the coach driver, who obliged. Karl didn't help her up either, which seemed cold. She wanted to talk to him, but she felt his reluctance. Curiosity burned through her. Who was this man? Why was he so stony? And if he didn't want her there, why had he sent for her? She wanted desperately to ask him, but his demeanor was anything but friendly. "We'll be married tomorrow," he said. "At noon." "I see. Today, you'll stay at the inn. It won't do to have ya in my house before." "I see." That was it. Nothing more. Not even a goodbye as he left her in front of the inn. Verdie was alone once more. She walked into the inn, feeling completely displaced and homeless. Who was this Karl person? What would he bring into her life? She didn't know, but what she did know was that she would have to fortify herself or she'd never be able to go through with the wedding. And it was imperative that she go through with it, she'd burned her bridges. With that, she walked into the inn, ready to get on with it. As a child, Verdie had been often asked what she imagined her wedding day to be like. She had never gotten the chance to answer aloud. Her mother had always taken over the question, describing the luxuries that Verdie would be privy to, such as a beautiful gown, the perfect decorations, and a sumptuous feast. Even at that age, Verdie loathed the sound of it. Privately, she'd always dreamed of a simple wedding, filled with flowers and love and a wonderful groom who would take her in his arms with a tender kiss. Never once had Verdie imagined a wedding day like the one she ended up having. Karl came to take her from the inn early the next morning. She dressed in her best gown. It was nothing close to what she used to wear, but it was lovely nonetheless. Karl himself wore a simple suit and avoided all eye contact with her. Verdie was aware of that strange feeling in her chest once more. She was even more taken aback by the hurt that threatened to take her over at Karl's refusal to acknowledge her. She had never felt so unwanted in her life. But the fact was that he did need her. Maybe, he didn't want her, but he needed her. The statement itself boggled her mind. The two went in to the preacher and his wife, who were waiting for them. It was a simple matter of exchanging vows and signing the documents. And then it was over, and Verdie was being taken to his homestead. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, but also the moment she'd been fearing. She was finally going to meet his child, the baby she was to mother. Karl did not talk to her most of their time in the wagon, but then finally he said, "Let me make myself clear. I require a mother for my child and nothing more. Don't expect me to be anything more to you." Verdie swallowed and nodded, keeping her mouth shut. She was stunned into silence. "My child," he dragged it out, "is the most important thing to me now. Nothing else. You will keep the house and care for my child." "I understand," she said quietly. Karl nodded and was silent once more as Verdie felt a tiny crack form in her heart at his cold words. But what had she expected? She had come here for selfish reasons as well, to run away from her family. For a fleeting second, she wondered if she should share that information, but she decided against it. What was the point of doing so? He wouldn't care to hear it, and she would be embarrassed. And so, wisely, she kept her mouth shut again. Karl's homestead was not what she was expecting, yet in truth, she didn't know what she had expected. It was a small house but looked neat enough. She got down from the wagon and made for the door, but he stopped her with a gaze, going in front of her. She waited as he went inside ahead of her. A few moments later, he came out with a woman behind him carrying a baby. The woman looked at her with a blank face, and Verdie knew instantly that she was being judged, the very thing she had feared. The woman had dark blonde hair, a square pretty face and dark eyes that bore into her with the intensity of a fire. She came forward with the baby. Verdie's eyes went to the baby, and she was in love. The child was beautiful, an angel covered in white cloth. Her tiny face was almost hidden by the cloth, but she opened her gray eyes and regarded Verdie. The little baby moved and Verdie felt the urge to go ahead and take the baby, but she waited until the woman handed her over. As the woman gave the baby to her, Verdie could feel the woman's lack of sympathy and perhaps annoyance directed towards her. Verdie didn't know what she had done to make the woman instantly hate her. But she couldn't be bothered with it right then, as her attention was fixated on the small child. "I am going," the woman said abruptly to Karl. "If you need me, just holler." "Thank you, Deborah." Deborah didn't spare Verdie another glance as she disappeared down the road to the left. Verdie watched her leave. The baby began to squirm, and she loosened her grip on the child and followed Karl into the house. She didn't know what she expected from the interior, but it wasn't anything like what she might have thought. It was decent, and there were separate sections for the kitchen, a sitting area, and what she assumed were the bedrooms on the other side. The thought of bedrooms made her blush slightly, but she didn't say anything. "You can put Sarah in her crib," Karl said. Sarah, Verdie thought. So this little creature was Sarah. Verdie nodded and moved further inside the house, spying Sarah's crib in one of the bedrooms. She laid her down, only to nearly stumble over Karl, who was carrying her bag. "Get dinner ready," he said before leaving. She balked. "Dinner? How? When?" She swallowed nervously and walked back out into the kitchen, staring at everything foreign to her. How was she to make dinner? She had no idea what to do. Before attempting it, she decided to walk about and take a look around the house. This was to be her new home, so she might as well familiarize herself thoroughly with her surroundings. The first thing she did was peer out into the backyard. There were 2 neighing horses, tied to the fence. There was also a small patch of land with what appeared to be dead plants. A garden? Who had kept it? And why had it fallen into disarray? The horses made Verdie nervous. She had obviously been around horses before, but she had never had the chance to ride them properly. She turned and went into Sarah's room again. Everything was clean, and Sarah peered at her from her crib. Verdie couldn't help but smile down at her, patting her slightly and taking a look at the few toys scattered about. The toys made Verdie wonder who the woman was who had been caring for Sarah. She seemed so close to Karl. Verdie put it out of her mind and wandered to the next room. There was one bed in the middle of the space. Was this where she was going to lie with Karl? The thought made her blush once more. She was curious about her new husband. He was nothing but cold toward her, but there was something in him that made her feel strangely excited. Perhaps it was the experience of meeting someone new. She didn't know how long she stood there, but suddenly she remembered that she had to cook a meal. She knew that even if it felt like an impossible task, she couldn't shirk her duties. The cooking turned out to be a frustration to her, which was no surprise. She put vegetables and water in a pot and dragged it over to the stove. Lighting it took her ages, but she finally managed to do it. Smoke gathered, and her eyes watered. Why was there so much smoke? Surely, this wasn't right. When she started coughing, she realized that she should have opened the windows, and so she did, but not before she heard Sarah cry. She ran to Sarah and found her wriggling and crying. Verdie felt on the verge of tears herself. There seemed to be so many things to do at once. She tried to find the cause of Sarah's discomfort and noticed the scent that wafted from her. She wrinkled her nose and looked about, searching for clean clothes to change her into. The whole event took more time than she expected. In the end, Sarah was quiet, but Verdie was worried about her pot of vegetables. Horrified, she ran to the cooking stove, and it was as she had feared. The bottom layer of the pot was caked in black and the vegetables weren't even cooked properly. Clearly, she hadn't put enough water in and had burned the food. Hesitantly, she tasted the concoction, screwing up her face in a grimace. Feeling herself lose hope, she transferred the mess into a bowl and then left the pot in the sink, knowing she was going to have to scrub it clean. It was already dark outside, and she heard footsteps as Karl entered. The first thing he said was, "Why is there so much smoke in here?" She had no words and he didn't look for any. "I'm famished." She served him with shaking hands. He didn't say anything as he took a spoonful, but then again, he didn't say much about anything. After more agonizing silence, he left half of his food behind and walked into the bedroom, leaving her to clean. Verdie felt her heart break. She was a disappointment, and she felt her own helplessness breed disgust within her. She couldn't do anything properly. It's only the first day, she told herself. There is time yet. But she didn't feel much hope even after telling herself that. She went to check on Sarah, knowing she'd need to be fed. How had she forgotten about a small child? She found some cooked cereal that she supposed Deborah had left and fed it to Sarah. Watching the baby gulp it down made her feel even guiltier. The poor child must have been mighty hungry. She changed Sarah's diaper and snuggled her back into her crib. After Sarah was well settled for the night, she took the lantern and went to the outhouse. When she returned, Karl was already asleep. She moved about quietly, changing into her nightgown. She lay down, watched his face for a moment, and then blew out the lantern. He looked gentler in his sleep. As she lay there, she thought ruefully that her first day had been a disaster. And something within warned her that this was only the beginning of disasters. Chapter 5. When Verdie awoke the next morning, she was alone. She got up and yawned, looking about. She wondered what time it was. She left the room to find Karl with Sarah, rocking her with a smile on his face. His tender smile made her heart quicken. Seeing this softer side of him made her think that perhaps he wasn't so bad after all. But then he looked at her, and his smile disappeared immediately. He stood and handed Sarah to her. "It's your duty is to take care of her," he said. "Not to sleep about while she cries." Verdie gulped at the harsh words but knew the truth behind them. He was correct, she was already failing as a mother. "I'm leaving," he said. She had wanted to ask him where he was off to, but she was afraid to say a word. After he left, she looked around and wondered what she should do now. She couldn't fathom what was done in a household, and she wished she had Emma there to tell her. Thinking of Emma, Verdie tried to remember what Emma had always done about the family manor. Of course, Verdie had never ventured into the kitchen or areas where the servants worked, but she knew she could figure it out if she put her mind to it. Emma always had a cloth with her in order to clean, and she was always fixing things. Verdie put Sarah down on a quilt and then set about doing what she remembered. She wanted to clean, but at first, she couldn't find a cloth. After she did find one and wiped down a few things, she realized that she was leaving more dirt than she was wiping up. She needed to remember to clean the cloth regularly. She accidentally knocked over a candlestick and broke the candle, almost weeping in frustration. Close to tears, she heard the sound of knocking and ran out to the door. It was the woman Deborah from the day before, and the woman didn't smile as she took in Verdie's disheveled look. "Is Karl there?" Deborah asked in her drawling voice. Verdie shook her head. "He left." Verdie felt animosity radiating from the woman. Deborah was clearly not only wary of her, but judgmental, but Verdie couldn't blame her. Even so, she desperately wanted to ask her for advice. "How is Sarah?" "She's inside," Verdie said, moving aside to let the woman enter. The woman made for Sarah and scooped her up from the floor. "Her nappy is wet," she said accusingly. "And she seems hungry. You fed her?" The child was whimpering and there was a wet stain on her gown. Verdie felt like a fool. Why hadn't she noticed those things on her own? Deborah made for the kitchen, taking care of Sarah with ease, putting cereal on the stove and then turning to Verdie and saying, "You eat yet?" "No, I haven't." Deborah nodded, increasing the amount of cereal in the pan. It wasn't long before she set down a bowl for her. She wasn't mean, Verdie realized, but Deborah didn't like her much. The thought made her smile sadly. Deborah gave her a look and then set about feeding the baby. "I imagine the beds is unmade, too." Verdie made no answer. "Do you know how to cook?" Verdie was too embarrassed to admit the truth, and Deborah let out an exasperated sigh. She muttered under her breath, making Verdie feel smaller. Verdie wished she could disappear. This wasn't what she had envisioned. "Make a stew," Deborah said. "If you know what that is. It's the easiest." With that, Deborah disappeared out the front door. Verdie wanted to race after her and beg her to stay, but her pride kept her in place. She could do this. She could. Verdie pushed away the bowl, finally giving way to her tears and sobbing into her palms. This was terrible, a terrible mistake. She should never have come here. How was she going to get any work done properly? Deborah's manner spoke volumes. Perhaps Karl also saw her as useless, and she wouldn't blame him if he did. She was proving to be a terrible excuse for a wife. She felt the tears coming again, but she refused to give in to them this time. Sitting around blubbering wasn't going to help anything. She was going to prove that she could handle that precious child and a household. If it was the last thing she ever did, she was going to do it. She hadn't left her previous life just to give up. With her determination renewed, Sarah stood up and set about to cooking once more. Though Verdie's dinner wasn't good, it was better than the day before, and Karl ate more. She watched him nervously, but he didn't say a word to her about the meal. At least, he hadn't complained. But one sentence from him made her realize her inexperience more fully. "You done the washin'?" Verdie was mortified. She hadn't washed any clothes. She hadn't even thought about it. Her face said it all, and she saw his eyes narrow. I will get to them soon," she muttered. With that, he left her alone again. She tried to gather her wits. She had made so many mistakes in 2 days that she didn't see how her determination could save her. She had to do better, or there would be no point to it all. The next day, Verdie woke up before Karl and had fed Sarah by the time he roused. Though he didn't say anything, she felt that maybe he wasn't so angry with her anymore. There was no way to tell as she served him his hot cereal. The silence was intimidating, but she refused to dwell on it. Maybe it wasn't so bad as she thought. That day, she decided she was going to do the washing, even if she had no idea how to do so. By mid-morning, she had lugged the sheets outside with her. She wondered where Karl kept the soap and what pot he used. She found a large tin tub and filled it with water from the pump, which thankfully produced water after she'd poured in a cupful like she'd seen Karl do while yanking up and down on the handle. Inside the tub was a cake of soap, and a washboard was under the sink. She took Sarah outside with her and set her up on a quilt. Then she began scrubbing the sheets and clothes. It was hard work, and she felt her skin tear and roughen with the pressure. The sheets were impossible, their heavy bulk seeming to mock her. She did the best she could, finally heaving them onto the line where they dripped like a rainstorm. Verdie had no idea how clean they actually were, but still, she stood there with a silly grin on her face as she observed the full clothesline. She'd worked extra hard on the baby's diapers, now realizing that she would need a bundle to make it through each day. 15 of them hung neatly on the line. Sarah started to fuss, and Verdie was eager to get her fed. She looked sleepy too, so a nap was probably in order. Verdie didn't know what else the baby ate besides the cereal, but she figured a nice bottle of milk was needed. Inside, she looked in the icebox but didn't see any milk. She'd have to ask Karl later. As she was looking about, she noted that there were few supplies left and the thought of having to go to town made her pause. How was she to manage that? She thought about it as she fed Sarah, smiling at her happy gurgles. Sarah really was a sweet child, and she seemed to be warming up to Verdie. She was dabbing the spilled cereal from Sarah's chin when she heard a knock on the door. It couldn't be Karl because he wouldn't knock. And even if it was, they would have little interaction. Her heart ached at the thought, and she went to open the door, Sarah in her arms. It was Deborah. "Get ready." "I beg your pardon?" Deborah didn't seem happy to have to repeat herself. "Get ready. Karl told me to take you to see the town." She looked at Sarah's mussed outfit, still wet in places from doing the laundry. "Get into dry clothes, and dress Sarah, too." "Now?" Verdie's mind scrambled. She needed to buy things, but she had no idea where Karl kept his money. Deborah only stared at her and said, "Now." Perplexed, Verdie followed the instructions. She changed her dress and put Sarah in a clean frock. Then she went to Deborah, who sat in the chair waiting for them. "Follow me," Deborah said. "Otherwise, you'll get lost, and then don't come sniveling to me." Verdie hugged Sarah closer to her chest. How would she manage a trip with Deborah, who obviously detested her? What was Karl thinking? Deborah didn't say anything, and Verdie reverted temporarily back into silence, tending to Sarah as they walked toward town. Verdie was of a mind to turn back, but she continued to follow, knowing that she could learn a lot from Deborah. After all, Deborah was a person who could help her. At that moment, Verdie realized how desperately she wanted a friend, someone in whom she could confide. She missed Emma terribly, and so, she tried to engage Deborah in conversation, but she was met with only grunts in return. She kept trying until they were in the middle of town. When Verdie had arrived a few days before, she'd paid little attention to the town, but now she admired the rustic charm it possessed. Of course, it was nothing like her booming city back east. But still, she got a good feeling from the place. The buildings were mostly unpainted, they were cared for. She even saw some cut barrels with flowers in front of a few businesses. She found that she was enamored by her new hometown, which was a great relief to her. Deborah went into a mercantile and proceeded to buy a few supplies. Verdie watched her carefully, noting what she did and didn't purchase. She was aware of the gazes on her. That she was the new face in town was evident. The gazes made her self-conscious, and she hugged Sarah closer. The tiny body gave her strength. Deborah eyed her as she bought things, as if waiting for Verdie to say something. But Verdie watched and memorized. She would do it next time alone. She wouldn't need to depend on anyone. "Where does Karl work?" Verdie asked, as they were heading back out of town. Deborah looked at her in surprise. "You don't know?" "He owns a trade shop." "I see," Verdie said politely, not having the faintest idea what that was. Deborah sighed heavily. "It's a shop where we take our things and keep them there in return for money. Of course, people like you wouldn't know." "People like me?" Verdie said. "Educated, upper class," Deborah said, raising her chin. "I don't care for Karl's choice in this. You had all the things you could ever need, and yet you came here. And you can't do anything." Deborah shook her head in obvious disgust. "You can go the rest of the way yourself." "So, I done my duty. Showed you the town." Verdie stared after her. What Deborah said wasn't a lie. Verdie was everything Deborah said she was. She came from a rich family, she was upper class and well educated, and she didn't know a blame thing about how to handle a household. Truth be told, Verdie herself was now questioning why she'd done what she'd done. But she was there in Plum River now. She needed to make a life. She needed to take care of Sarah. But, could she do it alone? She was trying her best, but she knew her efforts were sorry at best. Couldn't Deborah be her friend? And help her? Verdie walked toward her lone house with one arm laden with Sarah and the other with the bag of groceries Deborah had practically thrown at her. Verdie let out her breath in a huge sigh. The tasks she had to complete were going to take a lot more of her courage than she'd thought. Sarah began to fuss in her arms, perhaps aware of the turmoil in her new mother's heart. Chapter 6. That evening, Karl didn't seem aware of her preoccupation, but it wasn't as if Verdie thought he would. He ate his meal, spoke a few words to Sarah, and turned in for the night. After learning from Deborah about where he worked, Verdie had many questions for him, but she bided her time, knowing that it was too soon to ask. As she rested in her chair, she glanced around the house, feeling the ghost of Sarah's mother about her. The woman's presence was suddenly alive, almost as if she were watching Verdie try to take care of her husband and daughter. Verdie knew she would never measure up, and the thought crushed her. Never in her life had she felt like such a failure. Would it have been better if she'd never come? Better if she'd married Eugene? Better to have become a porcelain doll for the rest of her life? No. The answer rose within her. This was not the time to have such thoughts. She would not let herself fail at this new life. An idea sprang to her mind, and she decided to implement it the next day. Verdie took a deep breath. She didn't know if this was the right step, but she couldn't think of anything else to do instead. She was sure that Deborah would not take kindly to her, but she had to attempt it at least. Even Sarah seemed to feel Verdie's discomfort, nudging her shoulder as Verdie walked up to Deborah's house. With a deep breath, Verdie knocked on the wooden door. There was silence for some time before the door opened. Deborah's eyes revealed a series of emotions as they took in Verdie, who stood in front of her with the baby perched on her hip and a box in her right hand. Before Deborah could speak, Verdie said, "I brought some food for you. For the trouble you took the other day." Verdie fully expected Deborah to shut the door on her, but instead, Deborah let out a deep sigh and gave of defeat. She gestured for Verdie to enter, and Verdie did so. Her eyes quickly took in everything around her. The house was similar to Karl's except for the fact that it was tidier. Deborah's prowess as a housekeeper showed, and Verdie felt shame begin to take hold of her once more. "You silly child," Deborah said gruffly. "You know you cannot cook." "I know," Verdie said. "But I couldn't let it go." Deborah was silent for a long moment and then she burst into laughter, shocking Verdie. Deborah took Sarah from her arms, allowing her to set the box down and sit at the table. Deborah cooed at Sarah. "Did you feed her?" Verdie nodded. "Like you showed me the other day." "You learn quick, huh?" Deborah asked. "I attempted," Verdie said sheepishly. "Maybe I judged you too harshly," Deborah admitted, a new look of interest on her face. "I knew Sarah's mother, so I didn't know how it would be without her." "Sarah's mother?" "Elsie," Deborah said. "We knew each other for a long time before she got married to Karl. I got married first, to Joseph. Then she followed. We was neighbors as well as dear friends. But she passed away," Verdie said softly. Deborah nodded. "We was devastated. Karl, well, he ain't been the same since. He don't spend time with Sarah 'cause he can't get over her ma. He hasn't talked to me about her at all," Verdie said. "In truth, he's hardly spoken a word to me." Deborah nodded. "I suppose he hasn't. I can't blame him. He been through a lot. He couldn't believe Elsie was gone." "What was she like?" Verdie asked hesitantly. "Elsie?" Verdie knew she shouldn't have asked the question because she probably wouldn't like the answer, but Deborah began talking. "Elsie was a gentle spirit. She loved everything freely. She was happy about obeying Sarah, but the birth took its toll. She brought out the best in Karl. After she died, it was like Karl died, too. He don't look at Sarah the same anymore. That's why I weren't happy when he told me that he asked for a mail-order bride. I could have took care of Sarah myself. I love the child. I felt that Karl was running away from his problems, but I don't know, maybe it was for the best. I'm a poor substitute for Elsie," Verdie said. "I know that." Deborah surprised her by giving her a sympathetic look. "At the moment, you is, but we will fix that." Deborah spoke with confidence. "I'll help you learn so that you can take care of yourself, Sarah, and Karl better." Verdie's heart lifted. "You'll do that?" "I will. I supposed I need to make up for my behavior." "What about Karl's parents?" Verdie asked. "Don't they live here?" "Karl is an orphan." So was Elsie. They met each other young and then Karl opened the trade store. Where is the trade shop? Verdie asked. I'll take you there. We'll take lunch for Karl, she said. He's been asking me for lunch since you can't cook. He didn't say anything to me about it. He ain't likely to. Karl is a quiet person. Even more so, now. I am a terrible housekeeper, Verdie admitted, and in a fit of emotion, she told Deborah about how she had escaped from her previous home. By the time she was done, Deborah was wide-eyed, clearly seeing her in a different light. I had no idea that the rich had any problems at all. It doesn't mean much if a person can't do anything on their own, Verdie said with a faint smile. And marrying a horrible man like Eugene would have sealed my fate. Sarah's cry pierced the air, and Deborah handed her to Verdie, who patted her quiet. She likes you, Deborah said. I suppose she does, Verdie answered with a warm smile. I like her, too. She is a good baby. At first, she suffered quite a bit, too. Missed her ma something awful. Don't you have babies of your own? Deborah shook her head and Verdie saw the flash of sadness in her eyes. Not yet. God ain't seen fit to bless us. What does your husband do? Joseph is the doc in town. Isn't that wonderful? It was the right thing to say. Deborah, flattered to be talking about her husband, continued to praise him as Verdie listened with a smile. She felt at ease for the first time since she'd arrived in Plum River. It made her happy, and she was hopeful that perhaps she might be able to manage everything after all. Chapter 7. The next 2 weeks had to be the most satisfying weeks that Verdie had ever experienced. Deborah quickly turned into the companion that Verdie needed and desired. Deborah schooled her in many things: how to take care of Sarah, how to handle the housekeeping, and how to manage the accounts. In 2 weeks, Verdie could at least say that her food was palatable, and Karl seemed to agree, although he still didn't say anything directly to her about it. He continued to be remote, but Verdie was patient, and she prayed that she would eventually win him over. It was evident through their interactions that Deborah desperately wanted to be a mother, but she was waiting for the grace of God. She didn't talk much about it, but it was clear from her expression when she looked at Sarah. It made Verdie wonder if she would ever bear a child herself, but she brushed the thought aside. She was already a mother with Sarah, and she didn't need anything else. As they shared more and more about their lives with each other, Deborah admitted the reason Karl had asked Deborah to take Verdie into town that first time. He'd been afraid that Verdie would be ostracized. He thought that with her society ways from the East, she might put people off. This thoughtfulness was completely unlike how Verdie had perceived Karl thus far, and it touched her heart deeply. Deborah encouraged her to keep trying to get into Karl's good graces. So Verdie did try, mainly through her cooking. Under Deborah's continued tutelage, Verdie was becoming skilled in many areas. She was even better at accounts than Karl, and he had started to trust her with the money, though she still went shopping with Deborah. One day, though, Deborah forced Verdie to go into town alone. I won't always be available, she said. Go. Verdie felt ready for the challenge, so she nodded and went on her way, her purse feeling heavy with coins against her hip. It wasn't as bad as she had thought it might be. The grocer questioned her a few times, but she managed it. Finally, with her bag laden with supplies, she trudged toward home with Sarah in her arms. As she walked, she passed a small trade store. Despite Deborah's earlier promise, they never had visited Karl in his shop. Verdie felt immense curiosity about the place. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to go in and see him, but she wasn't sure how he would view her surprise visit. She didn't want him to think that she was trying to impose, but she was his wife. As such, she had a right to see his store, didn't she? For a moment, she lingered outside. Excuse me, a male voice behind her said. Verdie turned to see a tall man with spectacles and handsome features. He nodded at her. You're Verdie, ain't you? However did you know? We haven't been properly introduced, the man said. My name is Joseph. I'm Deborah's husband. Deborah talks about you a lot. Verdie smiled widely. Oh, I'm so glad to make your acquaintance. Are you going to go in to see Karl? I came to see him as well. Let's go in together. No, But before she could say anything more, she was maneuvered into the store. She looked around to see the treasures it held. It was a small shop, but she could see things of value everywhere. So this was what Deborah had meant by the art of trading. By the looks of things, Karl dealt in a wide variety of objects. She found it incredibly fascinating, but Joseph regarded her with confusion. It couldn't be that this is your first time here? Verdie was saved from answering by a small bell, and then they saw Karl appear behind the counter. His face was tired. As he looked up to see them, his eyes narrowed. She shivered when his cold gaze penetrated her. Joseph was oblivious to her discomfort and went forward to greet his friend, talking about something or the other. Verdie waited, shifting Sarah to distribute her weight better. Her shoulders were already aching from the weight of both the baby and her purchases. She knew she needed to have an explanation for why she had shown up there, but her mind was blank. I must be on my way. I'll leave you with your wife. Doc clapped Karl on the back, gave her a friendly wave, and left the store. Verdie cleared her throat. I was passing by and Doc Galling brought me in with him, she mumbled. Karl didn't respond. Your store is very nice. You should be on your way, he said. There's nothing for you to see here, and Sarah is likely ready for a nap. Verdie pretended not to be hurt by his words. Have you eaten? I'll get something from the cafe, he said. I can bring you lunch from now on, she offered. What about Sarah? You gonna drag her into town every day? I'll leave her with Deborah for a bit, and I won't stay long, she said. She didn't know why she was insisting, but she suddenly felt that this was imperative for their relationship to progress. His face was hard to read, and she wondered what he was thinking. Very well. Starting tomorrow, you can bring me lunch. Verdie nodded, a smile breaking through her face as she turned around to go back home. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. She couldn't wait to tell Deborah. As Verdie made to leave, she glanced back for a split second and saw that her husband's cold exterior had cracked and that he was smiling. Thank goodness, he hadn't seen her looking. Chapter 8. Deborah was excited when Verdie informed her about Karl's agreement to let her bring him his lunch. This is good, she insisted, her eyes shining. It's gonna help you get closer to him. Verdie didn't admit that she was still nervous about how it would work out. She still wasn't sure if Karl liked her cooking. He never commented on it, but she liked to think that her meals were improving every day. The next day, she spent a long time preparing his lunch before bundling it up like Deborah had taught her. She then walked the half-mile over to Deborah's house to drop Sarah off, then she headed toward town. In front of Karl's store, she took a deep breath and entered, finding her husband hard at work by the counter. She didn't say anything for a while, standing still as he worked, taking in how focused he was. He seemed to be completely oblivious to her presence, so she cleared her throat, and he looked up. He nodded to her, and she thought she saw the beginnings of a smile, but she couldn't be sure. She greeted him as warmly as she dared and left the bundle beside him before leaving. Despite having no expectations, her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Why couldn't he be more welcoming? She scolded herself for harboring false hopes, figuring that this was how it was going to be. It was flat out discouraging, but Verdie knew that she had to be stronger if she was planning to win him over. And she did want to win him over. There was something about Karl that drew her. There was something between them too, granted, it was very tenuous, but it was there. She felt it sometimes when he looked at her. Shaking her head, she continued on the long walk toward Deborah's to fetch Sarah. Sarah was sleeping peacefully when Karl arrived home. Verdie sat beside Sarah's crib, patting the sleeping child. She left the room to greet her husband and to serve him his dinner, which was simmering on the stove. She expected his normal silence and quietly ate her own meal alongside him. As she was clearing up, he said, "Do you walk to town?" Verdie's eyes widened. Were they to have a conversation after all? He went on. I been meaning to ask ya. Why don't you use the horses? I can't ride a horse, she said quietly. "I'll teach ya," he said. "I have time tomorrow. Knowing how to ride will help ya in case of emergencies." With that, he got up and went to the bedroom, making her wonder what exactly had just changed between them. Karl was true to his word. The next day, after Verdie was done with the cleaning, he was waiting for her with a horse, having unfastened it from the fence post. The horse was familiar with him and nuzzled his hand as he led her toward Verdie. Verdie bit her lip when he handed her the reins. "I'll help you," he said as she made to get up. He caught her by the waist and hoisted her up. Her heart raced and warmth spread through her. She settled on the horse and looked around. It was a beautiful view from her elevated position, and her tension lessened. She was jolted from her calm when her horse moved. Karl had taken her mount by the bit and was leading her slowly around in a circle. "You'll have to take the reins properly," he said curtly. Verdie nodded and gripped the leather straps tightly, feeling them dig into her palms. He led the horse around for a few more minutes and then let go so that she was one who was guiding the animal on her own. The horse behaved, and after a bit, Karl caught it again, gesturing that Verdie get down. Verdie slid from the saddle, and as she did, his hands wrapped around her waist again, helping her to the ground. At his touch, her breath caught and her pulse raced. Her eyes met his, and she saw a flash of something. But it faded away as quickly as it had come. "Tomorrow," he said, leading her horse back to the barn. Verdie stood there for a few minutes so that she could gather her breath once more. As she put her hand over her throbbing heart, she couldn't wait until her next lesson. The riding lessons continued for a week. Karl was faithful to his word. He appeared every day during lunch, taking her around on the horse, and watched her work to become confident and comfortable. Verdie tried her best to learn what he told her and not to ask him to repeat any of his directions. After each lesson, he would eat lunch with her and then leave for the shop. As the days passed, she sensed him thawing a little bit. Perhaps this was the way she could get through to him. She tried not to hold out too much hope, though, not wanting to be continually disappointed. However, that didn't stop her heart from aching whenever she saw him. Nor did it stop her examining the details of his face and wondering what his thoughts were. Soon, she found that all her thoughts were consumed by him, wondering what he was doing and what she could do to make him smile. After a week, he told her that they were going to move to some other area to practice. "Someplace else?" she said, surprised. He nodded. "A larger area to ride." "But what about Sarah? Deborah can handle her." After securing Sarah with Deborah, the two set out for a larger field. Verdie was happy to note that it wasn't far away from their home because she was already worried about Sarah. She had quickly found that she couldn't stay away from Sarah for too long. The baby girl was an extension of her now. "I am going to have you ride completely alone this time," Karl said, his eyes softer on her than usual. She nodded, and he let go. The horse didn't do anything. As cautiously as possible, Verdie urged the horse forward with gentle kicks on her flanks. The horse responded and trotted around the area, jostling Verdie in the saddle. But she was doing it, and all by herself. After a few minutes, a smile broke out on her face. "I'm doing better," she cried. Her enthusiasm shone through, and for the first time, she saw Karl smile at her. A full-out smile, and not one that he quickly hid. She couldn't help but smile back widely at him. She loosened the reins in her happiness and only barely saw a squirrel zip past. Then everything broke loose. The horse bucked, and Verdie gripped the reins in panic. The animal shot off and Verdie held on for dear life. Her heart beat wildly as she gripped the reins in fear. She had no time to understand what was going on, but she could distinctly hear shouting behind her. She tried to keep her hold on the reins as the horse raced across the open field. She desperately tried to urge the horse to stop, but it was in vain. It kept bolting across the land. Verdie feared she was going to die. The horse would not stop. Tears fell from her eyes. She wanted to see Sarah again. She wanted to see Karl smile again. She was certain her death was imminent. Everything passed in a blur. Her hands were cramped around the reins and the saddle horn. And then she heard another set of pounding hoof beats. She turned and saw Karl racing toward her. His face was grim, but he was gaining on them. Verdie yanked on the reins with all her might, and the leather strap seared into her palms. Karl was neck to neck with her now. Her horse shimmied to the side and skidded as Karl grabbed the reins from her. Both horses lurched to a halt in a cloud of dust, almost throwing Verdie off. She screamed and then everything went still. Karl leapt from his horse and she fell into his arms, shaking to the bone. She collapsed against his chest, crying. "Verdie. Verdie, are you all right?" he asked over and over. Verdie couldn't speak. She couldn't catch her breath or stop trembling. Karl's hands were in her hair and rubbing her back. His breath was heavy on her. She breathed in his scent and slowly calmed down, feeling the comfort of his arms. After a few moments, she gulped back her last sob and backed away. "I'm better," she said, still gasping softly for air. "No, you're not," he said. He took her hands in his and turned them gently, so they were palms up. They were swollen and bleeding from the reins. "We need to apply salve," he said. "Let's go home." He took the reins of her horse, got on his own, and then pulled her up behind him. She lay against his back, wanting nothing more than to let him take care of her. She closed her eyes, feeling the strength of his back against her face. Her heart swelled, and she felt her throat tighten. She loved him. She loved this stubborn, cold, grieving man. Chapter 9. The thought of being in love with Karl haunted Verdie. She found herself staring off into space at all times of the day, her thoughts consumed by him. She continually waited for him to come home from work. He hadn't taken her riding again, even though he'd said that she was going to be fine. Deborah seemed to notice her preoccupation but didn't say anything about it. She just smiled when she saw Verdie staring off at nothing at all. In the evenings, when Karl was with her, he spoke, but not more than a few more sentences. He would ask her about Sarah and inquire about her healing hands. Though it wasn't very personal, it was an improvement from before when he wouldn't speak at all. Verdie answered his questions eagerly, hoping that he would keep talking to her. Sarah became more and more precious to Verdie. Verdie talked constantly to her, and Sarah's reactions delighted her. It wasn't only Karl she was in love with, it was Sarah, too, whose sunny disposition was like fresh air. Verdie's love coursed through her all day long, and she found herself seeing everything in a different light. Yet, she yearned for more. She wanted to ask Karl all about that small patch of garden around the back of the house. Had it been his wife's? There was no other reason she could think of to explain why it had been abandoned. Was it truly off limits? She wanted to know his thoughts on everything, and she wanted to share her own thoughts with him. She wanted to tell him her story, but she didn't think he would be open to it. Even though Karl sometimes came home from work late, Verdie always waited to eat dinner with him. They sat down and ate silently, but companionably enough. One evening, he stared at her and cleared his throat. "I'll be going away for some time." "What? Where?" she asked, alarmed. "To a nearby town. There are some business matters that need to be dealt with. I'm looking to acquire quite a few items for trade." "When will you be back?" "Shouldn't be more than a week or two. Take good care of Sarah and yourself." "I'll set off at dawn." She nodded, searching his eyes for some flicker that he might miss her while he was gone. But she saw nothing. She sighed, and then with a burst of courage, she said, "I wanted to know if I could use that patch of ground around back. For gardening. It gets the sun well in the mornings." Karl stiffened. There was a long pause. "No," he finally said, his voice cold and strange. His tone was so harsh that she felt her heart falter. As she looked at him, she saw anger in his eyes, as well as unmasked sorrow. He glared at her. "You are my wife. That doesn't mean you can pry into everything. And quit hoping for anything more than what has been given." She wanted to jump up from the table and scream. He left the room, and Verdie, stunned, gaped at where he'd been. His words continued to circle around in her mind. She could never have imagined that a simple question would have elicited such anger from him. She shivered as she recalled the look on his face. He was truly angry at her. And then she knew. It was as she'd suspected. That patch surely had something to do with Elsie. It must have been hers. Verdie cursed herself for being foolish. She had been too pushy. She wasn't Elsie, and Karl didn't love her. She was only someone he'd married to secure a mother for Sarah. The finality seeped into her, and she wanted to wail with pain. Who was she fooling? Karl would never love her. Her heart squeezed painfully at the truth. She had stupidly grown to love him, but she could never hope to be anything to him. She sucked in her breath. She didn't follow him into the bedroom. Instead, she went to Sarah's room and sat down by the small bed pushed against the wall. She looked into the crib at the sleeping baby's face. The child was so peaceful that Verdie felt her heart swell with love. It was then that she decided she would not hope for Karl's love again. She would be content with Sarah's. It was not what she had hoped for, but it would have to be enough. Enough, she whispered into the empty air as she closed her eyes. Verdie was tight-lipped when she bid goodbye to Karl. He gave her a terse farewell, having reverted to his usual cold demeanor. As he left on his horse without a word, she turned away. She bolstered herself with the thought that she was going to spend the day with Sarah as usual. At first, it was fairly pleasant, but as one day stretched into another, Verdie ached for Karl. Deborah visited often, but the nights were lonely, making Verdie realize how much she yearned for Karl beside her. Sarah was an obliging baby, and Verdie worked tirelessly to make sure that her needs were met. Even so, the first week of Karl's absence passed slowly. The air was turning cold, and Verdie bundled Sarah up nice and warm. The lowering temperatures brought a sudden increase of illnesses around the area, and Verdie prayed that Sarah would be safe. Unfortunately, her prayers would be for naught. It happened one late afternoon as she was cleaning the house. It was time for Sarah's dinner, and Verdie went to fetch her from crib where the baby had been napping. As she walked in, she didn't hear the usual welcoming gurgles. All she heard was silence. Sarah was a cheerful child, and Verdie's heart filled with fear as she edged closer. Sarah's eyes were closed, but her chest moved up and down rapidly. Verdie reached for her and found her burning to her touch. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah, dearest, open your eyes." There were no words as Sarah struggled to breathe. "No, no, no," Verdie whispered as panic crept up her spine. She continued to whisper as she picked the small baby up. Moving quickly now, she wrapped both Sarah and herself up. She had to get to Deborah's, and as quickly as possible. Joseph would know what to do, he had to. The distance to Deborah's house seemed longer somehow even though she knew the way well. She felt her breath come out in puffs, and she held on desperately to the small bundle in her arms. She nearly cried out in relief when she arrived at the door. Her knuckles rapped wildly against the wood, and when the door burst open, she rushed in without waiting. "Whatever is the matter?" Deborah asked. "Sarah. She's sick." Verdie's voice was strained with fear. "Fever. She can't breathe well." "Where is she?" Joseph appeared, and Verdie unwrapped the child so that Joseph could see her. Joseph's face instantly showed his concern. "She's terribly sick," he said. "Deborah, boil some water. Quickly." Deborah nodded and scurried off as Verdie tried to catch her breath. "You did well coming here," Joseph said. "We'll do our best." But even as he spoke, worry creased his face. Deborah made up a room, and Verdie lay Sarah down on the bed, sitting beside her. Deborah brought in a steaming kettle, and she and Joseph fashioned a tent for the baby. Verdie helped as she could, but she was nearly frozen with fear. After an hour, the fever had not budged. Verdie frantically bathed Sarah's forehead with cool water, praying that it would help. Throughout the rest of the evening and the following day, Verdie did not leave Sarah's side. She refused all food, knowing that in her worry, she wouldn't be able to keep it down. All she could do, all she could think about, was trying to help the small child breathe. The fever fluctuated, and Verdie's hands on Sarah felt hot with it. She bit her lip to keep from bursting into tears herself at the thought of Sarah not recovering. Joseph and Deborah worked tirelessly beside her, bringing in fresh steaming water and applying poultices to the child's chest. Verdie tried to get little Sarah to drink something, but the poor child could barely swallow. Verdie couldn't sleep that next night. She was so petrified that something terrible would happen to Sarah if she closed her eyes for even a moment. Deborah tried to urge her to sleep, but Verdie refused. "Please take a rest, Verdie. I'll watch her and then you can take over for me." "No. You rest. I'm not moving." Sarah spent the hours wheezing with her small chest moving up and down while she worked to breathe. 2 excruciating days passed, and still Sarah's fever hadn't gone down. Joseph assured them that they were doing all they could. Verdie wouldn't leave Sarah's side, even though more than once she fell into a troubled sleep. But when she was awake, she dabbed the child's forehead with cool water and squeezed drops of water into Sarah's mouth. Verdie looked like a ghost of her former self. Her eyes developed sunken dark circles and her face grew pale. She was tormented with the thought of Karl not knowing his child was deathly ill, but she didn't have a clue where he was. They were going to have to wait until he came back. Joseph volunteered to go to Karl's place daily and care for the animals. On the 3rd day, Sarah began showing signs of improvement. She took water now and even small amounts of food, but Verdie was heading toward a collapse. Deborah fussed loud and long, trying to get Verdie to sleep in her bed, but Verdie wouldn't do it. Joseph just shook his head and said, "You cannot move a mother from her child." Sarah remained listless, but she rested more peacefully, and Verdie's hope that she would recover grew. Sarah had become everything to her. She loved the child unconditionally and all Verdie wanted was for her to be well again. During that next night, Verdie crawled onto the bed with Sarah and patted her tummy till the child fell asleep. "Keep recovering, darling," she whispered. Sarah's response was to move slightly, and Verdie kissed the child's forehead, tears escaping her eyes. Verdie sank into a deep sleep. When she awoke, Sarah was completely still. Verdie shot up, panic roaring through her. She cried out in despair, tears rushing down her cheeks. Relief burst through her heart when she saw Sarah's chest rise and fall, evenly. Verdie nearly collapsed in relief. Joseph entered, having heard her cries. "What's happened?" Verdie could only cry as Joseph examined Sarah. "The fever has broken. Thank God. She's breathing normally." The relief in his voice rang through the room. "It's going to be all right, now." Deborah, who had followed her husband into the room, hugged Verdie, who crumpled against her. Over the next few days, Sarah steadily recovered. But Verdie was quickly feeling worse and worse. Of course, afraid for Sarah, she had paid little attention to her own health and hadn't noticed the signs of her own illness nor heeded the warnings. As Sarah continued to grow stronger, Verdie lay on the bed trying to regain her own strength. Late one night, there was a knock on the door. Verdie stirred and heard Deborah answer it. "Where are they?" Karl cried. "I came home. They aren't there." Verdie struggled to get up to explain, but she fell back onto the mattress, too exhausted to move. She heard Deborah explain what had happened. Karl burst into her room. "Where's the lantern?" he asked, his voice tense. Deborah lit a candle. Karl checked on Sarah, who was sleeping peacefully. Then his eyes fell on Verdie. Verdie lay across the bed, unmoving. She blinked up at her husband, and opened her mouth to speak, but all that came forth were scraping, rasping sounds. She panicked, her eyes stretched wide as she tried to grab her breath. "Verdie!" Deborah cried as Karl bent forward. He caught Verdie's shoulders and drew her to his chest. "Verdie! Verdie, can you breathe?" Chapter 10. Karl had never met someone like Verdie. He himself had an impoverished childhood, wrought with hardships and pain, but he had grown through it, finally achieving what he believed was happiness with Elsie. The two had been content, and then Elsie had announced that they were going to have a child. He had never been so happy in his life. But Elsie had died, and he was a broken man left with a young daughter. He knew he couldn't take care of her, and so he had pushed that duty onto someone else. And that someone was Verdie. When he'd first seen Verdie, he'd known that she was not who she'd been pretending to be in her letters. She had been terrible at everything, and at first, he'd felt his frustration toward her grow daily. But then, she'd gradually improved through her own grit and stubbornness. He admired her for that, even if he hadn't told her so. And why hadn't he told her? As he held her limp body in his arms, a wave of shame and regret filled him. But when she had asked about that patch of land, that patch where Elsie had kept her garden, he'd lost his temper. That garden had been Elsie's pride and joy. He'd let it fall to ruin, but still, how could he turn it over to Verdie? It wouldn't be right. He gazed down at Verdie's pale face and called himself a fool. He admired this woman, maybe even loved her, but it was too late. Cursing himself, he buried his head in her neck. Her skin was so hot. So very hot. He looked up at Deborah in desperation. Is she going to die? The words nearly stuck in his throat. Sarah lived through it, Deborah said, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm. She will, too. Deborah, boil the water. We've got to start all over, Joseph said as he joined them. Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it, Karl said, laying Verdie back on the pillow. Her eyes were closed and she wasn't gasping now, but Karl could hear how shallow her breathing was. She plumb wore herself out with Sarah, Joseph said. Karl's throat tightened with emotion, and he fought the tears in his eyes. Karl sat beside Verdie the entire next day. He pressed cool rags to her forehead, nearly weeping with relief when he felt it was slightly cooler as dusk fell. Both he and Deborah applied poultices, while Karl tended to Sarah as best he could. All day, Karl felt shame for how he'd treated this brave woman. As he sat beside Verdie by candlelight, he bent close and whispered, "Wake up. Verdie, wake up now. I want to talk to you." Verdie stirred, and slowly, miraculously, her eyes fluttered open. She looked around as if in a daze. She glanced down at her hand, which Karl had clasped with his own. She frowned and tried to take it away, but he held on. "You're sick," he murmured. "You need to rest. But you're going to be all right now." "Sarah," she said, her voice raw. "Where is she?" "I have to rest," he said firmly. "Sarah is well. Deborah is looking after her, but you must rest." Verdie squinted up at him, as if still trying to make sense of things. "When did you come home?" "Last night," he said. "The two of you weren't home." She shook her head. "Sarah was so sick. I had to come here." "I know. Deborah and Joseph told me." No. I have to work and clean and you haven't had dinner yet," she rambled and only quieted down as he put his hand on her forehead. "Hush," he said softly. "I'll go get you something to eat. You have to try to eat something. All right?" She nodded, and he left the room. Verdie's throat felt raw. She sipped bits of broth only to make Karl happy. She still couldn't understand the change in him. He sat by her, spoon-fed her, talked to her, and continually asked if she required anything. It was completely confusing, but she found herself warming to his attention. She took to watching him, when he dozed by her side. She saw Sarah for short periods only, for Joseph was afraid she might make Sarah sick again. Karl rarely left her side, and she was starting to feel cherished, despite all that had passed between them. Yet still, in the back of her mind, was the niggling fear that he would again revert to his cold, harsh self. During her second day in bed, Karl spoke about Elsie. It was in passing, but Verdie's eyes widened as he mentioned things about living with his late wife. Trying to keep the conversation going, Verdie dared share some about her own past. She told him things she had never before dared to reveal to him, not wanting to be hurt by his indifference. But now, Karl listened and didn't say anything besides patting her hand after she was finished. She felt strangely relieved after sharing. She noted that he was touching her more, her hand, her shoulders, her hair. She reveled in this time with him, but she couldn't quite put down her fear. "You are supposed to stay in bed," Karl said. Verdie shook her head. "I feel better." She was tired of lying in bed. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see if this fragile new beginning between them would hold together in their real life. "You work too hard." "Try too hard," he said. "I'm almost back to normal," she countered. "I want to go home." He lingered, and then as she made a move to walk past him, he caught her hand. "I have something to get off my chest." Verdie stopped and turned to him. "I've been a regular jackass to you," he said, not looking her in the eye. "I treated you like you never deserved to be treated. Well, I want to apologize." Verdie sucked in her breath. She felt dizzy as he raised his eyes and looked at her. "Karl," she whispered. "Verdie, forgive me," he said, his eyes intense as his hands clutched hers. "I want to start over. You and me. Things'll be different now." Tears burned in her eyes, and she blinked up at him. He looked cautious at first, and then he leaned slightly forward, hesitating only a moment before his lips met hers in a soft kiss. Warmth filled her even as he moved back. "I should have waited," he murmured. She shook her head, and her tears now fell. She would have leaned forward again, if she hadn't heard Sarah's cry pierce the air from the other room. The two exchanged glances and laughed before leaving the bedroom, hand in hand. "We're going home," Karl announced to Deborah and Joseph. The couple grinned at him and nodded. Deborah handed Sarah to him. "I'm thinkin' your little one is as ready as the two of you are." Verdie gave her dear friend a look, and Deborah smiled back, seeming to understand the shift that had taken place between Verdie and Karl. Verdie wanted to weep all over again when she thought of how wonderful Deborah had been to her. How, in so many ways, Deborah and Joseph had saved her and Sarah. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes brimming with tears. "No thanks needed. You just get on home now." Deborah straightened her shoulders. "I'll check on you soon." Verdie nodded and grasped Karl's hand. The three of them, Karl, Verdie, and Sarah, left the house into the cool afternoon air. Oddly, Verdie didn't feel cold. She felt warm and loved and confident. Her new beginning was really happening now. She was sure of it. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit